X-Men Apocalypse is the 9th instalment in the long-running superhero franchise and acts as both a follow-up to Days of Future Past, as well as being the final entry in the First Class trilogy. Directed once again by X-Men regular Bryan Singer, the film stars James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, Jennifer Lawrence, Nicholas Hoult, Oscar Isaac, Rose Byrne, Tye Sheridan, Lucas Till, and Sophie Turner. Now before I get started, I just have to say, going into X-Men Apocalypse, I was actually really worried. I am actually a really big, lifelong fan of the X-Men movies. I really love the X-Men films, especially Bryan Singer's original 2 X-Men films, First Class and Days of Future Past, which was Bryan Singer's return to the franchise. With X-Men Apocalypse, I was worried whether it would be good or not, although I don't feel obliged to feel the same way as the critics do. More often than not, I agree with the critics, and I was really worried that it was gonna just be a mess, and it was gonna be a letdown and a disappointment and a really big slip up for the franchise. I was really hoping it wouldn't be, especially after Days of Future Past, which was such a, return to form for the franchise. And like I said, Bryan Singer's triumphant return to the franchise. And I went into Apocalypse expecting a mediocre movie at best, but I came out actually really pleasantly surprised, and I thought it was a great film. I really, this is the rare occasion where I disagree with the critics. I mean, it's not been an overwhelmingly negative response, but it's been very mixed, and all reviews I've seen anyway have been quite negative. A lot of critics seem to be hating on this film, which I really don't understand. I don't think it's the best X-Men film we've ever had, but I think it's one of the best, and it's just as good as these other great past X-Men films we've had. I would still rank X2, First Class, and Days of Future Past above Apocalypse, but I still thought it was a great film, and I really don't understand the hate it's getting from a lot of critics. I just really don't get it. For me, I thought it was great. Starting off with positives, of course, for me the best thing about this film was that it retained the emotional, character-driven, dramatic elements that made past X-Men films so great, like X2, like First Class and Days of Future Past, and those elements were in abundance again here in this film. It was very character-driven, and it had the emotional, dramatic elements. And for me, that's what makes the X-Men films so great. They are big superhero movies, but as well as all this big, cool, crazy action, they're very kind of emotional and character-driven and dramatic and grounded in kind of like a real world that we can understand and relate to. For me, that was the best thing about this film, because you put aside the final battle and a handful of other little action sequences scattered throughout, and for me this film was essentially a drama. There were action sequences thrown in there, but the majority of this film, it was a lot of character driven scenes and a lot of dialogue scenes and a lot of emotional dramatic scenes, and that's what I like most about it, and that's what I found so refreshing, and I didn't expect either from what they made it look like in the trailers. So I'm really glad, because for me Bryan Singer did for this film what he did for the original X-Men film and X2 and Days of Future Past, and that yes, they are big action movies, but they're essentially dramas as well. If you take away all the action, they're essentially dramas. And that's what I like most about his X-Men films. Before I go out, I'm not like a Bryan Singer fanboy. I don't love everything Bryan Singer's ever done. First Class is one of my favourite, if not my favourite X-Men movie, and that wasn't Bryan Singer, that was Matthew Vaughn, so just to say I'm not kind of fanboying over Bryan Singer, but I do think Bryan Singer does a great job with these X-Men films. Like I said, how he kicked it off with X-Men and X2, with Days of Future Past, and with this film. I think he continues to show us why he's so good at making these films. There were many scenes throughout this film that were getting me tearing up, and I found quite emotional. So yeah, and that's what I like most about this film. And another thing I really liked about X-Men Apocalypse, which again was another thing I wasn't expecting, was that it felt very much like a sequel to First Class. I mean, obviously there's some things that carry over from Days of Future Past, but because it's the First Class cast the entire time, and it's set in the past, it feels very much like a direct continuation of the First Class story. And it was great because it felt so much like they've been calling it like the First Class trilogy, this new trilogy of X-Men films, First Class, Days of Future Past and Apocalypse, and I never really saw it as its own trilogy, but until now, because what I really liked about X-Men Apocalypse was that it felt very much like a final entry in the First Class trilogy and a very fulfilling installment. Like there were so many character arcs and subplots that were set up and established in First Class and kind of were left hanging and weren't really kind of tied up, but they brought them back in this film, which I wasn't expecting, and I really like that, because a lot of things from First Class they had to like ignore essentially Days of Future Past because there was so much other stuff going on. It was much a bigger scale story with the whole future stuff and the Sentinels and all that, but with this film they were able to go back and tie up many loose ends from First Class, bring characters back, finish off certain stories in a very concluding and satisfying way, which I was not expecting, like I said. For instance, Moira McTaggart comes back in this film, and they kind of tie up many loose ends with her character in First Class, because obviously she's not in Days of Future Past, but she comes back here and plays surprisingly bigger a role, and the whole kind of Charles and Moira relationship is picked back up, essentially. And that I thought was really, really great, and I wasn't expecting that. And and how they brought that relationship back and kind of tied that up, where it was kind of left hanging at the end of First Class. I thought it was really well done. And another thing I really like were the performances from the cast, namely James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender. I'm a massive fan of Charles and Erik as characters, and for me, the best things about these X-Men films is the relationship between Charles and Erik, and them as characters and their differences and their conflicting ideologies, and for me they're always at the core and the centre of every X-Men film, even from the very beginning. And I just love that whole dynamic and that whole relationship, how it played a big part in both First Class and Days of Future Past and again here. And for me it was probably one of the best things about the film. And the performances as well. James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender continue just to nail it. They're so great. I mean, I love Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen and what they did in the original trilogy. They were great in those roles. But I love James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender just as much, maybe even more, because what I really like about what they've done with Charles and Erik over these few films is how they've grounded them in an emotional and relatable way and made them more human, both Erik and Charles. I mean, Erik's always been kind of relatable and understandable, with the scenes of him in the concentration camp, and we saw what happened to his parents, and that's so we're really able to feel for him and understand where he's coming from. And again, that comes back into play here, and there's many callbacks to his origin in First Class, which I really liked and worked really well, how they weave that into the story. It was really well done. And again with Charles, because Charles Xavier's never really been my favourite character. I always kind of found it hard to kind of connect with him. But with Days of Future Past, I think they did an incredible job of really humanising him as a character. They really kind of grounded him in a way that you were able to relate to him and understand, because he was, in Days of Future Past, he was really downbeat and depressed and, had lost all hope. And then we had that great scene of him talking to his older self and getting reassurance from his older, wiser self in, what he needs to do and, how he can make himself better. And I think they did such a great job with Charles in Days of Future Past, because I love what they did with Erik in First Class. I think Michael Fassbender as Magneto really stole the show in First Class, and I think the surprise standout of Days of Future Past was James McAvoy and what they did with Charles Xavier. And I think they are both, again, on top form here. And I love what they did with both Charles and Erik, because they've both changed and grown and evolved over these films, because it's really been like 20 years, so to speak, since we saw them first in First Class. And I love how they've been so different in each of the films, in First Class, Days of Future Past, and now Apocalypse, because you do change when you grow older. You're not the same. You're not going to be the same 10 years later and then 10 years after that. You're going to change. And I like the fact that they started off in different places, especially Charles. He was like this kind of like really wise, zen-like, just brain on wheels essentially in the original trilogy. And then how he was really different in First Class, and then how he was really different again in Days of Future Past. And what I like what I did with him here is that he's not like Patrick Stewart yet, but he's becoming more like that. He's older now, he's wiser, he's more experienced, he's becoming more like that Patrick Stewart version we know from the original trilogy, which I really like, because it's getting closer to that timeline, and you know, it's been like 20 years, and I like the fact that, I mean, there's still like callbacks, and we still see glimpses of his first class self and his Days of Future Past self, because it's still the same character, you know. But I like the fact that he's different here. He's grown. He's more mature. He's older. He's wiser. He's more like the Professor we know. And yeah, I think it's just great, because if they had gone with what they had here straight away, it probably wouldn't have worked, and we wouldn't have been able to kind of connect with him and buy into it. But because they had him and what he was like in First Class and Days of Future Past first, and now they've led into this, it's all worked so well. It's like this journey the characters have gone on, and how he's kind of grown and changed and evolved and developed over these films. And I think James McAvoy is just so great in the role. And like I said, with Erik as well, Erik's one of my favourite characters. He's always been one of my favourite X-Men characters, and he's probably one of my favourite comic book supervillains as well, because you can sympathise with him and you understand where he's coming from. You can really feel for him, because for me, one of the best things about this film is that you can really connect with the characters, especially Erik. I mean, oh my god, I mean, I've always been a big fan of Erik as a character. But I'm not joking when I say that almost every single scene Erik was up there on the screen, I was practically in tears. I don't know why, it's never had that effect on me before. I mean, there's been scenes before in X-Men films that I found emotional, but almost every single scene Erik was on screen in this film, I was almost crying, and it was just so well done. They really go for it in this film, and it's so heart-wrenching, and it's got such an emotional punch to it and so much weight to it. I mean, I don't want to mention any specifics, but certain scenes I really liked. I mean, the scenes with his family in Poland. There's a scene in a forest which is just so great, probably one of the best scenes of the entire X-Men franchise so far. And what was so great about it, it's not a comic booky scene. When I was watching it, it was like, it hit me, it was almost like watching a scene from Macbeth or something. And it just struck me as like, what other comic book movie can you watch? And it's like watching some kind of like Shakespearean tragedy. It's just, oh my god, it's just, because the character of Erik, it's a very kind of tragic story, and a very kind of tragic character, and it was almost like watching a scene ripped straight from Macbeth, which is, oddly enough, a film that Michael Fassbender did last year. It was such a great scene, that forest scene. And then when he gets recruited by Apocalypse as well, and there's a scene in Auschwitz which I absolutely loved, and I thought was really well done. And like I said, the Charles-Erik dynamic as well, they don't get as many scenes together here as they did in, say, First Class, because they're separated a lot of the time, but the scenes they do get together are so great, and I just love it whenever they're on screen together. For me, some of the best scenes of the X-Men franchise so far have just been Charles and Erik dialogue scenes. I just love seeing Charles and Erik together just talking. It can be so riveting and so kind of emotional and powerful, and we get scenes like that again here. There's a scene when he's talking to Erik through Cerebro, and there's a scene when he's talking to Erik and Apocalypse and the four Horsemen there, and there's just so many great dialogue scenes, and the whole dynamic and the relationship between Charles and Erik plays another big part in this film as well, and comes into play in the climax of the film as well, and I just absolutely love it. For me, it's the best thing, probably one of the best things about the film, and one of the best things about the whole franchise in general, is the whole Charles-Erik dynamic and relationship, and how it plays out, and how it's such a big part of all the films. And I think it was just so great how they interwork that into this film as well. But of course, the one who steals the show again, it's Evan Peters, who returns as Quicksilver, which I really like, because he was one of the highlights of Days of Future Past. He really kind of stole that movie. That kitchen scene was just so great. Again, he kind of steals the show here. Again, there's another amazing Quicksilver sequence, and I love the Quicksilver scene in Days of Future Past, but it was more of just a moment, a cool, funny moment, and he only had kind of a bit part in the film. He was a really cool, funny character, but he was used more as a plot device. He came in, he did his thing, and he was gone, you know, which was a little bit of a shame. But in here, he plays a much bigger part in the story. He sticks around for a lot longer. He plays a bigger role in the film overall, and the Quicksilver sequence in this film is so great. And like I said, I love the Quicksilver scene in Days of Future Past, but this one here is much bigger and much better in my opinion. It's a whole extended sequence that goes on for like 2 or 3 minutes, and it's just so great to watch. It must have taken them so long to do, but it was worth it because it was such a cool scene. We get another really cool musical track accompanying it, and it's just so much fun, and one of the best scenes in the film, because up to that point it's quite serious and dark and dramatic, and then suddenly Quicksilver comes in and it just you can just sit back, relax and just have a great time with it. It's just so much fun to watch, and Evan Peters is just so great in the role. And also I have to talk about Oscar Isaac as Apocalypse. Now this has been a very divisive element of the film for many people, I think, because it's a very different kind of character, a different kind of villain we've ever had before in any X-Men film. Most of the time the villain's either Magneto or a human character, so the fact that we've got this really big kind of super villain that we've never really had before in any X-Men film today, I was worried going in. I was like, oh god, is this going to work? It's not going to work at all, is it? Because I wasn't really sold on it from the trailers. But oh my god, I was really blown away by Apocalypse in this film and Oscar Isaac's portrayal. It wasn't corny or, cheesy at all. You understand where he's coming from and why he thinks the way he does about the world. And it's also surprisingly very deep and profound in what he says and how he expresses his arguments and how he sees the world. And I think it was written really well. I think his dialogue was great. I think Oscar Isaac portrayed it really well. I mean, it's not recognisable as Oscar Isaac. You went in not knowing who Oscar Isaac is or if that was him. You wouldn't know it was him. But even though he's buried under a lot of makeup and prosthetics, I think he really did do a great job than if they'd just got someone else who wasn't as good of an actor. Because people have argued, he was buried under the makeup and he doesn't get anything to do. But I would argue that Apocalypse was such a great character and came across so well because of Oscar Isaac's performance in the role, even though he was in a lot of this makeup and that. I'm glad that Bryan Singer went with a great actor like Oscar Isaac, because he was able to just deliver the lines so well and present it so well in a way that we kind of really bought into it. Because I was worried, is this going to be convincing or believable, or is this going to be a bit of a joke? But honestly, people may poke fun at images and the trailers, but when I was watching this in the cinema, nobody was laughing when Apocalypse was on the screen. It was like, whoa, you could feel the weight of it. I mean, whenever he's on the screen, you can feel this kind of godlike power that he exudes, and you can feel just the dramatic weight whenever he's on screen, whenever he's just talking, and it's just so great as well because he's extremely powerful and very foreboding, not just physically with all the power he has, but psychologically as well. He has these powers of persuasion, and he's able to convince his four horsemen to join him and fight for his cause by just talking to them and convincing them to join him. And I really like that, because they could have so easily gone down the route of him brainwashing his four horsemen, but I like the fact that he convinces them by talking to them, even with Erik as well, and you buy into it and you're like, okay, I get it, that's why they would join him. And I think that was really great as well. I mean, some standout scenes. The scene when he kind of coerces Charles when he's using Cerebro was a great moment. The recruitment of Erik and how he indoctrinates him to his cause, and the scene with him and Erik in the steel factory in Poland and in Auschwitz, I thought those were great scenes as well. And in the final battle as well, I thought he was great. And he got this real sense of power and devastation and destruction, like, oh my god, how are they going to stop him? So I think he was a great villain. And of course, I've got to talk about the action sequences. This, like I said, is the biggest and most action-packed X-Men film to date, because as well as retaining the dramatic elements, there's some really big bombastic action set pieces, but I really liked it because, like I said, there's not loads of action, but when we do get that big final battle at the end, it is so worth it. It's a great build up to a great payoff at the end there, and it's such an awesome final battle. Big, destructive, disastrous set pieces that will just blow you away, and just powerful, overwhelming action sequences that make you feel the gravity and scale of the situation and of what's at stake. Some particular highlights were the opening battle in ancient Egypt, the disabling of the world's weapons, and the final battle in which you see all of the X-Men teaming up to take down Apocalypse, which is an extremely satisfying and fist-bumping moment. And also, one last positive point I have is John Ottman's score. What I really liked about the score was that it was very kind of subtle and understated and emotional, and it was more in line with, say, a drama, which was very refreshing. And I also liked that there was callbacks to Days of Future Past and X2 in the score. There's a little callback to Xavier's theme in Days of Future Past, and there's a bit in Cerebro. And there's a little callback to Stryker's theme in X2, and just little things like that I really like, because it helps it feel more kind of cohesive and all connected. It's one big shared universe of films, and I really like the little callbacks like that. And also, like I said, the Apocalypse score itself I really like, because it was quietly beautiful in the small intimate character moments, but yet it was kind of godlike and majestic in the epic apocalyptic scenes as well. Going on to negatives now, I do have some negatives. It's not a perfect film, it's not without flaws. I do have some issues with it, nothing major really, that was a big problem for me, but the first thing is that the first act is a little jumbled. It attempts to juggle quite a lot of characters and stories, and it's a little jumbled. It was a little bit of a mess, but it wasn't a problem that lasted. It didn't take long until everything came together and it became more cohesive and focused. So, you know, it was a little bit of an iffy start, and there was a lot of little things going on all over the place, a lot of attempting to follow a lot of different characters and a lot of different stories all at the same time. But as soon as it all came together, like I said, it worked much better. It wasn't as seamless and as smoothly handled as perhaps it should have been in that first act, but like I said, it didn't take long until it came together, and it was a lot more effective then. And also another negative I have is that there is quite a bit of expository dialogue in the film. So, you know, dialogue that characters say that is kind of just telling us things and informing us of things. I mean, it was most prevalent during the first act again, the first half of the film. It wasn't so much of a bigger problem as the film went on. It did become less and less abundant as the film went on, but there were moments early on in the film where there was a lot of expository dialogue, characters just telling us things, or just saying things to other characters that they didn't need to say, that were just kind of like informing other characters or informing us as the audience, instead of just holding back and having faith in us to like learn these things and figure them out ourselves. But like I said, it became less of a problem as the film went on. So in that way, it was a good thing, and that the film did improve as it went along, and it did gain more confidence and assurance in itself as it went on, and it did improve and got better as it went along. So in that way, it was a good thing. It didn't just fall apart and turn into a big mess. It did become more confident and assured in what it was. And like I said, it was most prevalent in the first act of the film, in the first half, but as it went on, it became less abundant and less of an issue. But by far my biggest criticism of this film, it's more of a technical criticism. It's nothing to do with character or story or you know, structure or form or anything like that, but it's the CGI. The CGI wasn't terrible, but for me, it was under par. Considering this is supposed to be the biggest and most action-packed X-Men movie to date, the CGI for me was not up to scratch at all, because there's many big bombastic action set pieces in this film, and the CGI does look very noticeably fake. For me, it did anyway in certain parts, and it kind of took me out of the film a bit. I mean, not all the CGI is terrible. Like the Quicksilver scene, for instance, is amazing, but there's some big action sequences in this film where the CGI does look very fake, and it kind of took me out of the film a bit. But again, it was just a small technical criticism, and it didn't, you know, detract from my enjoyment of the film, or it didn't ruin the film for me or anything, so it wasn't that big of an issue. Finally, the last negative I have with this film is that the four Horsemen were extremely underutilised, I have to be honest. With the exception of Erik, the four Horsemen, I mean, they served their purpose in terms of fulfilling their action duties, but as far as fleshing them out and developing them into kind of multi-layered characters in their own right, it didn't really happen. I mean, they didn't really have time, but again, they didn't really get much to do, and they were a lot of the time just standing around, following Apocalypse around. They didn't really get much to do. Like I said, they hardly had any lines. They got some cool, awesome moments in the final battle, but other than that, they didn't really get a whole lot to do. We get a glimpse into the origin of Storm, but then after that, she's kind of like, doesn't really need to be there in a way, and Angel was kind of like brushed aside, which was a little bit disappointing. He didn't really get a whole lot to do at all. And Psylocke was really there just to look hot. Gotta be honest. I mean, she did look great, and she had some really cool, awesome action moments, but again, we didn't really get to know much about her as a character at all. They did leave the door open though for Psylocke to return, so I'm excited for if she could come back in a future film. And of course, Storm's going to be joining the X-Men now, so hopefully we should get to see more of her as a fully fledged member of the X-Men. It's just Angel who's kind of brushed aside which is a little disappointing, seeing Ben Hardy, who plays Angel. It was supposed to be his big break, and he really didn't get anything to do at all, which was a little disappointing. But yeah, that, as far as the negatives are concerned, that's all I really have to say. There was nothing major for me that I really didn't like about this film. So overall, this for me was one of the best X-Men films to date. I still haven't decided whether I'd rank this higher or lower than the very first X-Men film. I still haven't decided. I'll probably be on par with it because they're both solid films. They're both really great films in my opinion, but they both have some issues and neither of them are perfect films. For me, I really enjoyed Apocalypse for what it was. I thought it was a great film, one of the best X-Men films. It did have some problems, it did have some issues, it was a little rough around the edges, similar to the first X-Men film. I think this was a solid entry. It wasn't as, great a film as, say, Days of Future Past was, but I think it was a good X-Men film. Yes, it wasn't as good as Days of Future Past, as First Class, as X2, but that's not to say it wasn't very good, because those films are just amazing. I just love those films. So I still really enjoyed X-Men Apocalypse, and I thought it was really good. I really don't understand the hate it's getting from a lot of critics. I think it is well worth checking out. I think if you are a fan of the X-Men movies and have enjoyed what they've done in the films so far, if you enjoy Bryan Singer's X-Men films, like his original two, and Days of Future Past, I think you will enjoy this, because for me, what made those films so great are still in abundance here in this film. The dramatic elements, the emotion, the character-driven nature of the film, it's not brushed aside, it's still very much in abundance here, as well as getting really cool action set pieces as well. I had some little issues and criticisms with the film here and there, but overall, I thought it was a really great film. I thought it was a solid entry in the franchise. So for me, I'm going to give X-Men Apocalypse 4 stars. So there we go, that was my review for X-Men Apocalypse. Have you seen the film yet? And if so, what do you think about it? Let me know down below. I'd love to know. But for now, I've been David O'Sullivan. I'll see you next time.